Apart from the traditional customs adopted at the courts of kings and emperors of previous centuries, some of the rulers allowed themselves certain things that amazed even their contemporaries. Welcome to Flip Side of History, the other side of the known history. Let us today tell you about the bizarre misdeeds of the rulers of the past. The Roman Emperor Caligula. Despite the simple fact that for his time Caligula was considered a fairly educated man, a competent leader and politician, in history he is known more as one of the most licentious monarchs, whose tricks are still striking today. The emperor's lavishness knew no measure. He would throw gorgeous feasts with the rarest and most amazing dishes, wear exotic clothes and shoes, or demand that food be served to him on gold leaf. One of Caligula's favorite entertainments was the orgy ships. That was the name given to galleys decorated with pearls and precious stones, which had everything from a heating system to temples and banquet halls. It is quite understandable that the interior decoration of the galleys also amazed the guests. The walls were decorated with marble, precious species of trees, and of course, gold, pearls, and precious stones. By the way, the galleys even included swimming pools. Contemporaries who had been on the orgy ships wrote rather scarcely, but even their testimony is enough to appreciate the overall magnitude. The ships had ample lounges, baths, and galleries, with different varieties of grapes growing, as well as unusual fruit trees. Caligula, who had a passion for gold, demanded that the floors of the palace be covered with it, because the emperor liked to walk barefoot on it. No wonder that as a result of such recklessness, the treasury of the Roman Empire quickly ran out of money, and the emperor himself even imposed taxes on prostitutes. Aside from his passion for jewelry, Caligula was an outright sadist. For example, during the games he forbade viewers to hide under the shelters, forcing them to suffer the heat. Or the decrees were written in such small handwriting that the citizens simply could not read or even understand what could not be violated at this time. With such hobbies, it is not surprising that Caligula also managed to distinguish himself sexually. The emperor cohabitated with 3 of his own sisters at once. With the king in the same bed and a man's kisses. This is a rather ridiculous custom also depicted in medieval paintings. It was therefore mistakenly assumed by many scholars that if a king was lying in bed with a man, it was a sign of corresponding orientation. In truth, even royalty could share a bed with a man without any implication. There was only one condition, that the second person should also be of royal blood. This tradition appeared on the principles of economic saving. It is much easier to prepare one bed than 2. The tradition of men kissing on the lips, which seems wild today, also had no subtext. Such a kiss meant only a sign of the highest trust, like the exchange of one's own clothes. This custom was transformed into the highest reward from the king, a fur coat from the king's or tsar's shoulder. The madness of the Roman Emperor Commodus. Commodus was unfairly overshadowed by the more famous Nero and Caligula, although his excesses were not just wild, but simply insane. Being a master of the sword, in violation of Roman law, Commodus liked to take part in gladiatorial battles. By rule, a free citizen was not supposed to be a gladiator, and after each victory in the ring, all the senators began to shout, "You are a god, you're the first, you're the luckiest of the people, you're a winner, and you will always be a winner." There were at least 300 women and about the same number of men in Commodus' harem. But that was not the wildest thing about his outbursts. The emperor adored rather nasty jokes. For example, guests at a feast might be served excrement on golden platters, and in pots instead of wine, a similarly formulated liquid. And finally, Commodus can rightly be called the forefather of the Gestapo executioners of World War II. He was simply crazy about the role of the doctor, and in this imposture, the Roman emperor operated without giving anesthesia to living people. Ultimately, omnipotence completely deprived Commodus of an adequate perception of reality. The emperor began to call himself the son of the god Jupiter, Hercules, and called Rome his personal colony, renaming it Commodus City. Heliobal's food mockups. Another joker on the throne who outraged his contemporaries with his shenanigans was the emperor Heliogabalus, Elagabalus. The emperor loved to serve his guests moulds of food, which were mixed with real food. The emperor was amused when his guests broke their teeth on the wooden potions, and to make the experience sharper, either insects or frogs were placed inside the fake dishes. At Heliobal's orders, live scorpions or poisonous snakes were often thrown into drinking jars. The anguish of those who received the bites amused the emperor to the point of tears. And the most savage amusement was the real gas attack. Sometimes the floor of the feast hall was covered with poisonous rose petals. The fumes caused many guests to die right at the tables. Lorenzo de Medici's tricks. Nicknamed the Magnificent, Lorenzo de Medici was famous for his shenanigans, which were planned more carefully than chess games and military operations. For instance, when the ruler was fed up with the excesses of his physician, Lorenzo, who loved free booze and debauchery, had the doctor drunk to unconsciousness. The emotionless body was taken to a completely isolated dungeon, where the physician lived in isolation for a year. At the same time, Medici announced the death of his physician, who was solemnly buried in a closed coffin. A year later, the unfortunate man was taken to the woods and released. The man, completely unaware of what was happening and disoriented, somehow made his way to the city, where he caused panic among the townspeople. The inhabitants thought that a dead man had risen from the grave. Even the doctor's own wife refused to let the reanimated dead man into her dwelling. But even this was not enough for the Medici. He decided to arrange a public exhumation, first hiding a black dove in the coffin. When the coffin was opened and a black bird flew out of it, the townspeople thought it was the devil himself, and Lorenzo de Medici simply laughed at the effect that had been produced. Creepy deeds of Chinese emperors. The daughter of an emperor of the Song dynasty, Princess Shang Yuyin, had a bedchamber made for herself in one of the most expensive brothels, to which 30 men were immediately assigned. When the princess visited her little nest, all the men had to stay close by and please the princess. Empress Wu Hu was not far behind from her. She believed that men should be humiliated all the time. But in order to combine humiliation with pleasure, the empress invented a rather insidious tradition. Any official who wanted to pay his respects to Wu Hu had to do so not only with gifts, loyalty, and words, but also by licking the lower stem of a lotus to the adored empress. The process of respecting took place outside of a private place and, in fact, in public. The most amazing is the testament of the Yellow Emperor, who is considered the forefather of all Chinese. The Yellow Emperor was convinced that in order to be immortal he had to sleep with 1,000 chaste girls. He succeeded, according to extant documents. The most interesting thing is that when the tomb of the Yellow Emperor was opened, there was no body, only sandals and a sword. So perhaps the immortal old man is still walking around the Chinese vastness. Another Chinese emperor, Qian Fei, distinguished himself on his way to the throne. Knowing that all previous emperors, so it coincides, were third sons, his own brother, third in time of birth, Qian Fei killed. Then, to keep himself completely safe, Qian Fei murdered all of his male relatives. Some uncles, however, the emperor left, putting them in cages. The wives of the destroyed male relatives Qian Fei immediately took into sexual slavery. Those who refused were ruthlessly killed. By the way, he also took the wives of living husbands into slavery. All those who refused to go with him to his bedchamber were also killed, and at the same time the madman took the life of the unhappy woman's husband and even her children. At last, the most awful act was the emperor's reprisal of one of his uncles. The emperor's first action was to take his wife away from him, and when the husband resisted, he sent him a mutilated body, saying that the woman had died. After watching the inconsolable husband mourn for some time, the emperor eased his suffering by cutting off his head. Thank you for watching our video. Subscribe to Flip Side of History and leave a like.